Let's start with a little history. You come from a very musical family on both sides. Could you talk a little bit about your family's musical heritage?
Sure. So my father, Garry Harrison, is a native of Charleston, Illinois, which is about an hour past Champaign-Urbana, south, and grew up there. His father and his grandfather all played the fiddle, and just kind of that was his first exposure to old time music, and the fiddle specifically, and the banjo. And my mom is from South Bend, Indiana, and very classically trained, plays piano and organ and violin and viola. And so they met through old time music at the Indiana Fiddlers Gathering. And they each, my mom can read music and write music and very theory trained, and my dad only plays by ear, by tradition. This is a very oral tradition that's passed down only by sound, and so they each had a strong affinity for the other's talents that was very different. And and so my dad and his brothers Steve and Terry Harrison, and their really good friend John Bishop and Chirp Smith, and all, there's just kind of a group formed, and they would get together as friends, and then also play in a string band together, and that became the Indian Creek Delta Boys in the 70s. And then, the rest is history.
Your grandparents were musical as well, right?
My dad's parents, yes, were very much in the old time and country tradition of fiddling and playing for dances, and my grandma, Pauline, which is my middle name, was the singing cowgirl at the radio station in Tuscola, Illinois. So they, just like my parents, were, and then my mom's side of the family, my grandpa Bert was a Lutheran minister, so it was very much written, read church, religious music. That was kind of their first exposure, and he started a congregation in South Bend. And my grandma Genevieve, I got my grandma's names, Genevieve and Pauline. She played the violin classically and piano and sang, and they were very musical families, both of them, but in very different ways.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Harrison portion of the Dear Old Illinois collection came about? What was the impetus to start collecting?
So my grandpa Cliff Harrison, my dad's dad, played the fiddle, but he passed away when my dad was, I think, 20 years old, and so he had learned a bit of music, at home, but then just feeling that loss and wanting to keep on playing tunes and learning from other people, he and my uncles, just through friends of friends, kind of rambled around central and southern Illinois, trying to seek out old timers that played the fiddle and the banjo, just specifically to learn tunes, to learn new tunes, and to keep building and growing in their repertoire of that kind of music. And also it ended up being a really good serendipity, and it led to the Dear Old Illinois collection, which is actually two collections. It's the Harrison collection, which is instrumental string band music, and then the collection of David S. McIntosh, who was a professor at SIU, who was really focused on ballads and poetry and vocal music. So the two collections together have been really well regarded as a good, well-rounded collection together. But for my part, the Harrison side was just, the goal was to learn tunes and on the fiddle and the banjo and guitar. And for learning purposes, they brought along recording, cheap old tape recorders. And even before they started to play music, got to know people, got to be friends with them, established a rapport, and then would, graciously ask permission to record them and to share the music with, for the senior generation to learn to share the music with them.
So would you say that the way that Dear Old Illinois came about is kind of the same origin for the Indian Creek Delta Boys?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they played, the Indian Creek Delta Boys played for square dances and, gigs and different, they were very much interested in playing gigs, and so to keep learning more tunes made it even more fun to play them out for audiences.
It bears noting that source musicians in the Harrison collection are all white of British, Irish, and European descent. There are some black source musicians in the Macintosh portion of the collection, but it's also predominantly white. The Gerald Illinois collection is a rich resource, but it's also not comprehensive of the traditional music of Illinois, and that's not necessarily what they set out to do in collecting it, right?
Sure. Exactly as you said. I think sometimes there's a conception that this was a superimposed grant project that could have been tasked with gathering all the ethnicities of the entire state of Illinois and capturing their music. And that's just, first of all, it wasn't superimposed. It was completely just, as I mentioned before, done through friends of friends and through, social circles in that way, and through a lot of effort, to seek out senior musicians. But it's a very comprehensive collection of one specific type of old time music in Illinois, and that is, I'm happy to acknowledge that and talk about it. And I would love nothing more to then dig deeper into, and I know people have other ethnicities of quote unquote old time music or traditional music. So this is a very specific lens that the entire collection was gathered through. I also want to say we do know that some of the second generation sources for the fiddle tunes in Gerald, Illinois, the fiddler that my dad learned it from a traveling African American player that came through town, and was just a very brief encounter, not somebody that they got to know very well, but because the Coles County Fairs in Charleston, and that brought a lot of traveling different types of attractions through. And so there is the sense that there is a presence there, but unfortunately we just don't ever get to know the real source of, and we don't get to, it's unfortunately not, we're not able to connect those dots in that way.
There's more work to be done.
Yeah.
It would be great to learn about the broader and deeper roots of this music, for sure. What are you doing to make this music more inclusive today?
I think the first thing anybody that is situated within the old time or bluegrass or any kind of traditional music community, I think the first thing that I'm trying to do is just be open to having conversations about how to make it more equitable and more inclusive. And even if those conversations are a little bit uncomfortable, I think it's important that they're not to be avoided. So first of all, just acknowledging that. And then second of all, we have a Garry Harrison Memorial Scholarship Fund in memoriam of my dad, because he was always very, very much a generous and open musician and person within the old time community. And so we've funded scholarships for people to attend the Bluff Country Gathering in Minnesota. And then most recently we worked with the Old Town School to fund teenager, 11 to 14-year-olds to attend their summer fiddle camp. And that draws a really interesting cross-section of the Chicago youth community. And I think that is just the biggest way to keep this music going, honestly, and to make it branch out outside of the kind of, for lack of a better word, traditional music communities, or the people that are already, in and amongst this kind of music.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about your dad, Garry Harrison, who was an incredible player, collector, tune writer, and a huge influence on the old time community. Do you want to talk about when and how you started playing music with your dad?
Sure. I did take Suzuki violin when I was from ages 4 to 8, and complained every single minute of it because although I could sense that I enjoyed it, it was a very classical music track, and I was like, not for me. It's not for me. So quit that altogether, dabbled with piano here and there, and then probably in junior high I started playing acoustic guitar, and then that was how my dad and I would spend time together, as he would play fiddle tunes and I would play backup guitar. And just, that's very much on brand for old time music. Whenever my dad and my uncles would go to visit senior musicians, they would play guitar. Like, they would play banjo, they would back up the senior musicians, and they would play the fiddle tunes for them. So not only to learn the tunes and to listen to them, but to like make that kind of connection and play with them, not just sit and listen to them, but to feel like they were all, you know, engaging in the same space and same activity. So that's kind of, and then, you know, once I decided to pick up the fiddle in my early 20s, I realized that I had, by playing backup guitar, I had heard all the tunes, and it was a really easy transition to kind of get them in my hands and onto the fiddle.
Do you want to talk about some of the original tunes that your dad wrote?
Well, from an early age, he was always making up songs and ditties and just goofing off, basically. And all of his friends and, you know, friends and relatives will say that about him. And I think, like, the very late 90s, he released the Red Prairie Dawn album, which has become, you know, a really favorite of the old time community, and even crossed over into like some jazz communities. And, you know, so it was an album of all of his, all but 4 of them were original fiddle tunes that he had composed. And you'll hear a few of those in our jam session at some point. And so, yeah, I think that was one thing that got the old time music community really excited, was to have new tunes to play, because this is always, you know, people, it's a traditional kind of canon of tunes, and sure, everyone puts their own spin on everything, but it's always really exciting when fiddlers compose tunes in the style of old time music and kind of keeps it fresh in that way. And so, yeah, he just has made up some tunes that people really love to play.
What was it like to learn from your dad and also to learn some of his tunes?
In the very beginning of me expressing, or showing, I would say, you know, when I pursued him to teach me another tune, okay, you know, like I was here in Chicago in college, or shortly thereafter, and so I would, you know, call him on the phone or email him and say, like, okay, he would send me a tune on email, like a sound file, and then I would like call him on the phone when I learned it and play it back to him, you know, like pen pal learning, a little bit like that, at the very beginning when I was like rough and not ready for prime time. And then, you know, so that was kind of how it all started, and then it became clear to him and to me that I was really serious about pursuing it and not just, you know, kind of messing around, but not really interested in, you know, taking it to the next level with my playing and everything like that. So he would very much just show me tunes, and I would observe. It was not like all of the workshops that I give are 10 times more instruction than I've received on a lot of the tunes. And I, you know, break things down based on observation of how my dad played them and demonstrated them to me. But it's not as if he broke it down into a workshop or anything like that. It was more us playing tunes together, us both playing on fiddle, him playing on fiddle, me guitar, just kind of spending time, you know, playing music together. Was the way that I learned. And he, first and foremost, taught me the Dear Old Illinois tunes. Like, taught me the tunes from, you know, Pappy Taylor, who was a huge musical influence on him, who's very well represented in Dear Old Illinois, and, you know, Harry Ely and Jess Abbott and all the people that he had the closest, you know, personal relationships with. So he started there. He didn't start, even though I was playing, started learning like 3 years after the Red Prairie Dawn album came out. He didn't start there. He was like, no, we're gonna go back to the beginning and learn all the old timey tunes. And so I didn't actually. I mean, again, he didn't play the Red Prairie tunes often at all, and so I've had to do a lot of like detective work and knowing based on his playing, piecing things together, definitely what's happening, like on the fiddle and with, you know, with the left hand, like on the bow and the left hand. So
it helps that you have a very similar style. You play in the Garry Harrison school of fiddling.
I definitely completely zeroed in and observed every single thing he did on the fiddle and made it my business to know all of that and to ask questions whenever I didn't, whenever I felt like I wasn't getting something or anything like that.
Yeah, that's what you bring to a tune that maybe you never learned directly from your dad, is years of learning and watching his playing intently.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let's do some show and tell. Do you want to tell me about some of these instruments we have here?
So we've said that my dad collected tunes, made up his own tunes, played the fiddle, and along with the guitar and other instruments. So you said earlier that the Gerald Illinois Harrison collection and the Indian Creek Delta Boys were very much like on the same flight pattern. And another thing that was in that same wavelength was building fiddles and repairing fiddles, because you can't play, it's no fun to play on an instrument that's no fun to play. And so Pappy Taylor, my cousin Cliff Harrison, who's a really talented fiddler and guitar player and banjo player, he has the original musical instrument repair sign that hung outside of Harvey Pappy Taylor's shop near Effingham, Illinois. And so that's a really special heirloom that we have in our family. Oh. And my cousin Cliff built a fiddle start to finish with my dad. So where this is all so Pappy Taylor, built basses and built, stand-up wooden bass fiddles and did all kinds of repairs on all kinds of instruments. Odie Griffith is another source in the collection that had a music store and did tons of repairs. And that was the first place that my dad learned all the nuts and bolts of what goes into fixing a fiddle, to making it from scratch, to just everything about how to do that. And these 3 fiddles and the odd instrument in the back, which I'll get to later, are all ones that he made from scratch. And on these, he even made all the fittings, like the pegs on these 2. You can see these 2 on the side are modeled after the Hamblin family of Indiana, and they only have the top 2 corners, and they don't have points down here, which is atypical.
And what's that called?
The 2-pointer?
The 2-pointer.
The 2-pointer, yes.
It's called the 2-pointer.
This is my 2-pointer that my dad built for me, and this is his 2-pointer that he'd be mortified and embarrassed that I'm showing anyone, because he stripped the whole finish off. He's like, I don't like it. I gotta redo it. And he didn't get to redo it yet. So, and then this, if you can go close in here, is a little, there's a cool little face there that is kind of a caricature of all the old timers that were just hilarious, pointy, it's just a caricature of an old person that they would, meet and become friends with. And my mom always tells the story that when my dad would ask her on a date, you're like, do you want to go on a date? And she's like, yeah, sure. And then they'd go see some old person in their home and just generally have a weird time, and then, get to know them and then play music. And it ended up being really fun, but not your typical first date.
Yeah. And what's that called?
The caricature is called Finney Binkley, which Chirp Smith knows all about. Anybody out there should ask Chirp Smith all about that.
But you also call these old...
Oh, the general term? This specific person is Finney Binkley, but the term for hilarious old people that, teach you how to play music is boinker.
Thank you. Would you like to start telling us about this little number?
Sure. So this is an instrument of my dad's own invention of sorts. It's based on a Finnish hukanal or bowed lyre, but those have much smaller and much more dense bodies. So you can see, he took the idea of a pointless fiddle, like if you put points on it here, it would largely resemble a fiddle, made it much thicker, and then the way that you change the tone, it's bowed across here. I'll play it in a minute. Sorry. It's bowed across here, and then you change the notes as if you were putting your finger on the finger of a fiddle, like the fingerboard. instead of doing this, you reach out here. It doesn't, this instrument doesn't, strictly speaking, have a name, but owing to the shape and the color and the overall general appearance, we just call it the peanut. So I will now endeavor to play the peanut.
Thank you so much to Genevieve and to everyone watching, and stick around for our breakdown of Garry Harrison's Mule Team.